entered today the book of James. According to the lectionary, we're going to be in James for the next few weeks. And just to look at the book of James essentially gets us into this ongoing conversation about the merits of good works versus by faith alone, salvation by grace or faith alone. The conversation of are we doers or are we believers? Now, in his table talks, it's basically a written record of conversations that he had with seminary students. Martin Luther, the great reformer, the author of Protestantism, he one of the first people to translate the Bible into a vernacular language, German. He is recorded as having said this about James, the book that we just read from. This is what Martin Luther says. We should throw the Epistle of James out of this school. It doesn't amount to much. I maintain that some Jew, which is hysterical because they were literally all Jews, but anyway, I maintain that some Jew wrote it who probably heard about Christian people but never encountered any. James, one of the apostles, right? Anyway, since he heard that Christians place great weight on faith in Christ, he thought, wait a moment, I'll oppose them and urge works alone. And this he did. It's pretty well established that Martin Luther wished the book of James was not in the Bible. It's also pretty clear that while he came up with other reasons why he didn't want it to be there, it's pretty clear that it's because James points out that by grace alone, one of the central tenets upon which this entire rebellion against the Roman Catholic Church that became the Protestant denominations is based. James, more than any other book in the Bible, points out that by grace alone is an insufficient concept of salvation. James makes some pretty overt claims that living a good life and doing good things, that the quality of your character here on earth is in fact vital to the Christian existence. And I don't know about you, but as a good Protestant growing up, I did have communicated to me pretty much all my life, preached to me, taught in Sunday school classes, all of that, this very Protestant idea that we are saved by grace alone, not by good works, that we can do nothing to earn salvation. It is purely a free gift from God over which we have no control except whether or not we accept it, which may or may not be a good work in and of itself, but I'll leave that to the side for now. We are saved by grace alone. And this idea originated in the Middle Ages as a counter-argument to the old wisdom. And by old wisdom, I mean one of the most ancient ideas about good and evil, justice and injustice in human existence. An old wisdom which still permeates our own popular opinions today on the subject of salvation. The idea that salvation is something to be earned. That there's this cosmic scorecard out there, right? That if you earn enough points, you're in. And if you don't earn enough points, you're not in, unfortunately. There's this fantastic sitcom. It's literally, I think, my favorite show ever. And not because it's perfect or even totally appropriate for all audiences, but it raises a lot of really important questions about right and wrong, the nature of good and evil, in probably the best format possible. It's a comedy, it is flat out hysterical, and it uses those comedic elements to highlight some real problems, some actual logical absurdities about some of the assumptions, some of the things that we have just taken for granted for centuries about the nature of right and wrong. And yes, this is me, once again, making that argument that if you want to understand theology or philosophy, which for all intents and purposes is the same thing, just read and watch, be a fan of science fiction and fantasy. It will help you. Okay, moving on. Now, the sitcom is called The Good Place. It aired first season in 2016. It's a modern day take on what is really a very old story premise, where these characters wake up in the afterlife and discover that there is a good place and a bad place, and that all their lives they have been earning points, surprise, surprise, to determine where they end up in eternity. Sounds familiar. Again, this idea permeates popular culture to this day. As I said, it is a comedy, but it is also the kind of mental exercise in good versus evil that human storytellers have been engaging in for more than 2,000 years now. There's a story in Luke chapter 16. It's Jesus' story about the rich man who doesn't help people out in his lifetime, and so he ends up in what we might call the bad place after his death. It's the retelling of a popular morality tale from Jesus' day. Other philosophers and thinkers were telling similar stories at the time. So Jesus himself engages in this mental storytelling exercise with his disciples. Now, in The Good Place, this modern retelling, this silly little sitcom, over the course of 4 years, it develops into a full-fledged and honest academic discussion of why we should live the best lives that we can here on earth. Why does that matter? Why is it important? The story starts with the main character waking up in the afterlife and realizing she's been put in the good place by mistake. Based on her actual life, right, her actual point score that her lack of good deeds should have earned her, she should really have been sent to the bad place. And so the show evolves from there into this main character who's terrified of being discovered and sent to the bad place. She seeks out help. She seeks instruction. She starts studying moral philosophy and ethics in an attempt to, after death, earn her way into the good place, so that if she is ever discovered, she can stay. Again, it's hysterical, and the acting is superb, and it's intentionally ridiculous. Because 3 seasons later, what not only the human characters who are trying to avoid eternal punishment, not only what they decide, but what all the higher beings in the show will also conclude ultimately, is that the entire afterlife system, the point system that has for all of time weighed souls on a cosmic scale of good and evil, is fundamentally flawed and unable to accurately judge the value and, more particularly, the moral potential of a human life. And that's the conclusion, by the way, that 2,000 plus years of human philosophy has brought us to in the modern world. And it is also, shocker, what Martin Luther, the great reformer, concluded when he started preaching by grace alone in the 1500s. The old wisdom, the logic that we can or have to earn our way into heaven, is fundamentally flawed for numerous reasons. First and foremost, the problem of motivation. If I'm only doing good things to earn a reward in the afterlife, is there any actual moral value to the good that I do? Also, the question of accidental circumstances. Some people end up doing more bad than other people simply because of the reality in which they exist, over which they have no control. So how do we justly judge such things? How do we weight the scales? And of course, the basic question, well, how good is good enough? That's the one that usually comes up in Christian discourse. Everyone does bad things. Where is the scorecard that tells us which good deeds erase which bad deeds? And who controls that scorecard? Now, the great thing about these questions, and by great I mean absolutely infuriating thing about these questions, is that they are not rhetorical. They are questions that do need to be dealt with and wrestled with and pondered in our ongoing struggle as human beings with these concepts of good and evil and how to best live our lives, particularly in a changing world. Certain people in the church in Luther's day had turned heaven into a point system, very literally. There were actual values assigned to activities in the Christian life: going to Mass, taking Eucharist or communion, saying the Lord's Prayer. All of these things had a point value. Literal years off your time in purgatory. The ability to cancel out or negate the value of certain sins. And then, if all else failed, there was the greatest fundraising scheme in all of time. It was literally a church fundraiser, which allowed people to purchase years off their purgatory sentence. The indulgence was literally a receipt. It was a piece of paper that stated, this person in name here has purchased X number of years off purgatory for themselves or their loved one. And they did it to build monuments in Rome. It was a fundraiser. Anyway, so with all this, with all the fundamental flaws in the afterlife point system concept of salvation, all the corruption in certain parts of the Catholic Church at the time, what became the Protestant churches started preaching by grace alone for all the right reasons. It was a good thing in its time. And I think the problem for us now, 500 years later, is that by grace alone does have its own set of fundamental and logical flaws. Flaws pointed out throughout the Bible that are really highlighted in the book of James. The book of the Bible that makes these really dramatic claims like faith without works is dead. And of course, our reading for this morning, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. And James goes on in our reading for today to define religion itself as living a good life. Pure and undefiled religion, James writes, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and keep yourself unspotted from the world. In other words, live a good life. That is religion. These aren't statements that really have a lot of room for interpretation when it comes down to it. And people they try really hard. But the overt biblical claim of the book of James is that if you are not living a good life, if you are not doing good things, then you are not really a Christian. You do not really have faith, and therefore, by extension, you are not saved. Now, the main way people try to argue around this, the best example I can find is this quote from a blog post. It's at zondervanacademic.com. And Zondervan, if you don't know, it's a major Christian publishing company. A lot of Bibles you've seen in your life probably have the Zondervan logo on them. It publishes mainly Bibles and academic resources. And one of their bloggers writes this: the reality is that James is not suggesting in any way that works lead to our salvation. It's a result of it. And this is the typical Protestant rebuttal to James. It's a great example, I think, of how to deal with the problem without actually dealing with the problem. In reality, the reality is that James is not suggesting in any way, it's quite an absolutist statement for one thing, that works lead to our salvation. And I have to take a step back and think about that and wonder, in a practical, real-world sense, what is the point that that statement is trying to make? And what is the point that it makes of James? Why would James spend so much ink and energy on this argument that faith without works is meaningless, that you are deceiving yourself if you think you have faith and are not out there doing good things in the world? But why would James even bother to make that argument if good works just automatically happen because you believe in Jesus? Just automatically happen as a result of your faith and of your salvation. I know from my own personal life experience, it's pretty obvious that that's just not how it works. Good works do not just happen. As a Christian, you're not just always happy. As a Christian, you're not just always selfless or generous or compassionate or just or honest. These are choices that we make every day. And as Christians, watching what we say and keeping our anger in check, which are both good works mentioned in our reading from James today, just having faith does not make these choices to control ourselves easy or even natural. I remember, as a teenager, getting so annoyed. I was reading this Christian book series, and it was a good series overall. But there was a point in the first book. The main character, this Christian teenager, was essentially protecting her friend who had run away from home because of an abusive parent. And in the course of that, she comes to this point where she has to decide between disclosing her friend's whereabouts or lying, essentially. And what annoyed me was not the moral problem there. What annoyed me was that the book was written, it was intentionally worded, to make it seem like, as a Christian, this teenager's natural inclination was to not lie. Like, lying was the difficult thing for her to do, no matter the circumstances. And it annoyed me because, as a Christian teenager at the time, I could have told you back then, and I will tell you now, that just is not reality, right? And worse than just not being realistic, I think this presentation of Christians as people who are, through faith and as a result of faith, just naturally disinclined to do wrong, I think it undermines and devalues the real struggle, the real strength of will and character that is required to do what is right. The strength of will and character that has to be developed with God's help, forged over time and reinforced again and again with every choice that we make. And having faith does not just override our natural human inclinations. That is why not just James, but the entire Bible actually spends so much time and energy and ink arguing that as people who claim to follow God, we have a responsibility to fight, to actively deny a lot of our natural human impulses and instincts and desires. That we have to strive as Christians to be better and to do good in this world rather than evil. Now, James is not what I think some Protestant arguments have reduced the book of James to, this treatise on how having faith makes Christians awesome people, which is what that argument does imply, at least to me. James is issuing a warning to all Christians everywhere and throughout all of time that if you would claim the name Christian, which literally means one belonging to Christ, then you must be of the high moral character that does reflect God in this world. And to have that kind of character, you have to spend a lot of time developing it. that every word you choose to say or not say, everything that you do or do not do, every time that you do or do not give into your anger, every single choice is a choice to build that character or to detract from it. And so the logical flaw in the notion of by grace alone is that taken literally and to its literal conclusion, it means one of two things. Either that doing good is easy and natural if you just believe, or that nothing we do actually matters at all. Tell the mean girl at school exactly what you think of her in the cruelest possible way. Lie to your boss about why you were late. Gossip about your next door neighbors. Shoplift those sunglasses that just look so good on you. Murder someone. Either Christians are just never tempted to do these things, or it's all good. God forgives you. Say a prayer and all is well. And the irony is that taken to its literal conclusion, by grace alone becomes the very type of salvation formula that Luther was trying to break free from. Mm-hmm. And I mean a formula literally. Like in certain church programs as a kid, I was handed an actual formula, printed on an actual piece of paper. And you may know it as the Come to Jesus prayer. Step 1 was pray this prayer, which is in itself this 2-step, acknowledge your sins, ask Jesus into your heart formula. And step 2, sincerely mean it, which is of course the escape clause. If someone later abandons their faith, there's this built-in explanation, oh, well, they didn't really mean it to begin with. And then step 3, be saved and enjoy eternal salvation by grace alone. And what's missing in that formula? Well, everything that happens next in your life. It's exactly the type of thinking that by grace alone was meant to break us out of. And it is, as James tells us, it's useless. It's like looking in a mirror and immediately forgetting what you look like, a deception, and dead. So, what can we conclude here? Here as we get ready to move into our next song, in this eternal struggle, it seems, between saved by grace or saved by works, which is right? In which path do we put our hope? And again, we're going to be in James for the next few weeks, so I suspect this topic will continue. The debate will continue. And for today, the takeaway, the conclusion, is first to recognize that both sides, salvation by grace alone and salvation by some cosmic point system of good deeds, both sides taken to their logical conclusions end in absurdity. Which means when you think it through, neither side can be right, not by itself. And so that is the conclusion for today. That the debate, grace or works, the debate itself is, I think, what actually matters. Because the debate itself provides balance for the absurd extremes on both sides. Are we saved by doing good? Yes. Are we saved by grace alone? Also, yes. The debate keeps us honest. It keeps us thinking. It keeps us working on ourselves and on our communities, and it keeps us humble. And I look at my own experience in life, and I think it is when the church has tried to shut conversations and debates down. Isn't that exactly the point where the church gets into the most trouble? When we stop debating, when we stop questioning, when we think we have figured out all the answers and resolved all the contradictions, that's when we fall into the absurdities, into the formulas, the indulgences and the scripted prayers that we can say with certainty do not bring salvation. Now, I think as long as we are debating, we are working toward better, deeper understandings of ourselves and of our faith. And also of that question, which is posed by our next song, the question, what gift can we bring? It's number 87. Yes, 87 in the hymnal.